Okay, so imagine this, right? The year is 1383, England. King Edward I, he's just died.
Oh, this is going to be good.
He leaves behind two sons, young sons.
Yeah.
Edward V, he's the rightful heir, of course, and then his younger brother, Richard,
Duke of York.
Duke of York.
Hmm?
But before Edward can even take the throne, get the crown on his head, their uncle, Richard III, good old Uncle Richard, well, he steps in.
Oh, boy. Here we go.
And he declares the boys illegitimate, basically throws them in the Tower of London,
Uh-oh.
and then poof, they're gone.
Vanished.
And this is the story that has haunted history for centuries. And you want to explore it. You want to dive deep into the mystery of the princes in the tower and then all these men who start showing up claiming to be them. I mean, how wild is that?
Well, it's wild, but it's also, it's classic history. It's all about royal intrigue, power grabs, and maybe, just maybe, a little bit of survival against all odds. I mean, we've got some amazing material to work with here. You found excerpts from that Not Just the Tudors podcast.
Yeah.
They had historians Nathan Amin and Matt Lewis on, and they have some wildly different takes on these events. And then, of course, we've got those documents that were recently discovered, which just add another layer of crazy to this whole thing.
I mean, it's like every time you think you have a grasp on what might have happened, something new pops up and just throws everything into chaos.
It's true. So are we ready to get into this?
Absolutely. So let's set the scene, okay? We're in the middle of the Wars of the Roses. Brutal, brutal power struggle.
York versus Lancaster.
Exactly. For the English throne. I mean, just bloodshed and backstabbing left and right.
Yeah.
So then Edward IV dies. And, oh boy, that's just thrown the country into absolute turmoil.
Yeah.
Richard III sees his chance and he takes it.
And that's where the mystery really begins.
Well, yeah, because officially Richard, he puts his nephews in the tower for, their protection.
Right.
Air quotes. But then they disappear. Poof, gone. Officially declared dead, but no bodies ever found. I mean, come on.
It leaves the door wide open for every theory under the sun. And it makes you wonder, was Richard protecting them or was he?
Getting rid of the competition.
Exactly, removing the heirs.
And then, as if this whole situation wasn't crazy enough, we have these pretenders. These men just appear out of thin air, claiming to be the lost princes, ready to take on the Tudors who eventually grabbed that throne.
Yeah.
It's like ghosts of the past coming back to haunt the new regime.
Absolutely. Each one, they're like a crack in the Tudors' nice, shiny image.
Yeah.
They're poking at their claim to the throne, saying, well, are you really the rightful rulers?
It's like, hey, remember us. We're the real deal.
And it wasn't just about who got to sit on the throne and wear the fancy crown. This was about power.
Oh, yeah.
Lineage. The future of England, the stakes were incredibly high.
Okay, so let's get down to brass tacks. Let's dive into the first pretender, Lambert Simnel.
Yeah.
He pops up in 1487, just a few years after the princes vanish. And he's claiming to be Edward, Earl of Warwick, the son of the Duke of Clarence. But Matt Lewis in that podcast, he suggests there might be a bit more to this Simnel fellow than meets the eye.
Right. He makes a really interesting point. He says, what if Simnel wasn't actually Warwick? What if he was really Edward V, the older prince?
I mean, it makes you wonder. Why would these experienced Yorkist rebels, the guys who really want to get rid of Henry VII,
right,
back this boy pretending to be someone who is still supposedly locked up in the tower, doesn't really add up.
It does seem a bit strange. You'd think they'd want someone with, a stronger claim, a more believable story.
Right, someone who could really rally the troops and say, look, I'm the rightful king, follow me.
Yeah, Lewis, he points out that some accounts from back then, they actually referred to the rebellion as being in the name of a son of Edward I, not specifically Warwick.
Huh, interesting. A son of Edward I.
And then there's John de la Pole, the Earl of Lincoln. He was the top Yorkist guy at the time. You got to ask yourself, why would he, with a perfectly good claim to the throne himself, support some random kid, unless that kid was actually someone really, really important?
Unless that kid was Edward V.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like a puzzle, and some of the pieces just
don't quite fit.
And then to top it all off, there's how Simnel ends up after the whole rebellion thing.
Oh, yeah. Let's not forget that. He leads an army against Henry VIII at the Battle of Stokefield.
Loses. Badly.
You think, okay, he's toast.
Off with his head. Right.
Yeah.
Pretender to the throne. Got to make an example.
But nope. Henry VIII, he gives Simnel a job in the royal kitchens.
Can you imagine serving dinner to the king you tried to overthrow?
It's like a really awkward family reunion gone wrong. I mean, it seems incredibly lenient for a king who was known to be let's say, proactive in solidifying his grip on power.
Exactly. And Louis, he sees this whole thing as a power move. Henry VIII taking this, let's face it, pretty serious threat and turning it into a joke. Oh, look, a silly boy playing pretend, nothing to worry about here, makes Simnel look harmless and makes Henry look even more in control.
It's brilliant in a kind of Machiavellian way.
Absolutely. But of course, we have to consider the other side of the coin. Nathan Amin, he has a different take on Simnel. He argues that Simnel was just a pawn in some local Oxford squabble, a bunch of disgruntled folks using this kid to cause trouble.
So not some grand scheme to overthrow the king, but just
local politics gone wild.
Yeah. And that Henry VII, maybe, he was just, genuinely kind to Simnel, saw him as a victim, a manipulated child. I mean, that paints a very different picture of Henry, doesn't it?
It does, and it shows how history can be spun in so many ways.
We have a cunning king manipulating events to his advantage, or a merciful king showing unexpected compassion. It's fascinating how these different interpretations can coexist.
But remember, we've only just scratched the surface. Wait till we get to Perkin Warbeck. He emerges in 1491, claiming to be the other missing prince, Richard, Duke of York. And that's where this whole thing goes international.
Oh, boy.
Buckle up, because things are about to get even more interesting. Okay, so let's get into this Gilder's Archive document.
Yeah, this is where things get really juicy.
That's really just throw a wrench in the whole thing. So we have this account, and it's supposedly written by Richard, Duke of York himself, like he's telling his own story, escaping from the tower.
Wait, so he's saying he didn't die?
That's what the document says, yeah.
Yeah.
Apparently, he managed to get out with the help of, get this, a Lord Howard.
Lord Howard, okay.
And two guys named Henry and Thomas Percy. And wait for it, it even mentions this guy, Miles Forrest.
Miles Forrest? Who's he?
Well, remember Thomas More, that Tudor historian? Later on, he writes that Miles Forrest was one of the guys who killed the princes.
No way.
Yeah, but in this document, he's one of the guys helping Richard escape.
So is this document saying that the supposed murderer actually helped Richard escape? That's a pretty crazy twist.
It is. And Louis eats this stuff up. He sees it as proof that the whole thing is real. He says if you were making up a story, you wouldn't include a detail like that.
I mean, yeah, it would be like admitting to a crime you're trying to get away with. You wouldn't just name your accomplice.
Exactly. And it's not just names. The document also mentions specific dates and places, things you can actually check against historical records. Like the Percy brothers, they seem to have come from land owned by Francis Lovell.
Francis Lovell? Wasn't he a big supporter of Richard III?
That's him. So Louis argues, look, all these details, they match up. They can't just be made up.
Yeah, okay, I see his point. There's a lot of specific information that would be hard to fabricate. But wait, we talked about this earlier, about two men protecting Richard after he escapes. That's in this document, right?
It is. One of the Percy brothers, he dies from the plague, according to the document.
Right.
And then the other brother, he goes back to England. Louis thinks he probably went to tell Elizabeth Woodville, the prince's mother, that Richard was alive.
Oh, yeah, and in Warbeck's letter to the Queen of Spain, he mentions being taken care of by two guys.
Exactly. One dies, and he's left with the other. It's the same story, basically.
Yeah.
And the timing of everything, it all seems to line up with what we know from other sources.
So Louis is on board, but what about Aemon? He's usually a bit more skeptical. What does he make of all this?
Well, I mean, he doesn't disagree that the document is real. He thinks it's from the right time period, late 15th century.
Okay.
But he's not so sure about the information in it. He points out that all the main people mentioned, like Lord Howard and both of the Percys, they were all dead by 1493.
So no one to ask, no one to confirm or deny the story.
Exactly. It's like the perfect cover story. No witnesses to contradict it.
I see. So Amin's thinking this could all be one big fabrication, but a really clever one, because it's packed with so much detail. And you know what else? A lot of what's in the Gilder's document sounds an awful lot like what Warbeck said in his confession. And we know Amin thinks that was probably forced. Oh, right, yeah. So maybe Henry VIII cooked up this whole elaborate scheme, planted this document, forced a confession out of Warbeck, all to cement his power.
That's what Amin's thinking. He's not ruling out Richard's survival entirely, but he's definitely raising some red flags.
So the Gilder's document, it's not exactly a smoking gun. It's more like a puzzle piece that could fit in multiple places. But we still have that other document, the one from the Austrian State Archives, the one with the 3 marks.
Yes, the 3 marks. So this document describes a meeting between Warbeck and Emperor Maximilian I. And during this meeting, Warbeck says, hey, look, I have these marks on my body. They can prove who I really am.
And the marks were on his mouth, his eye and his thigh, right?
That's right. And get this. Henry VII never publicly denied it.
Yeah.
Never said, nope, those marks are fake. Warbeck's a liar.
Now that is suspicious. If Warbeck was just some random guy making stuff up, wouldn't Henry have jumped at the chance to expose him?
You'd think so. Lewis argues that this silence is a big deal. He says Henry wouldn't have just ignored these claims unless he was worried about what might come out if he tried to challenge them. It's like he knew he couldn't disprove the marks without revealing something he wanted to keep hidden.
Maybe he was afraid that someone would come forward and say, actually, I remember seeing those marks on Richard when he was a kid.
Exactly. It would have blown his whole story apart. But Amun, he's not quite convinced. He says, sure, the marks are mentioned in a few different sources, but can we really be sure they belong to Richard? Do we have any proof that the real Richard had these marks?
So even if Warbeck did have these marks, they might not have been unique to Richard. Like, lots of people have birthmarks or scars. It doesn't automatically mean they're the lost Duke of York.
Right. It's like saying everyone with blue eyes must be related. Amin thinks that the people backing Warbeck, especially Margaret of Burgundy, they were looking for anything they could use against Henry VII. So maybe they just made up the marks. Or maybe they found someone with similar marks and said, look, it's him.
So we're back to square one.
Ah.
Was Warbeck a real prince or a really good imposter? All this new evidence, it's tantalizing, but it doesn't really give us a clear answer. It's just more fuel for the debate. But you know what's really bugging me? We've talked about the pretenders, the documents. But what about Elizabeth of York? What did she think of all this? She's the prince's sister, for goodness sake. Her silence through this whole thing is just deafening.
Yeah, you would think she would have something to say. I mean, she's married to the king, her kids are next in line for the throne, and these guys are running around saying they're her brothers.
Yeah.
You'd think she'd either be shouting from the rooftops, they're imposters, or welcoming them with open arms.
Exactly. But instead, nothing. No public statements, no private letters, no whispers of what she really thought. It's like she vanished, too. I mean, it really is strange, right? You'd think she'd be right in the thick of it, you know, defending them, denouncing them, something. But nope, she's just silent.
And that's what makes it so interesting. It's this huge mystery right in the middle of the whole story. Lewis, he thinks maybe Elizabeth was, you know, a little bit scared.
Oh, yeah, Henry VII, he wasn't exactly Mr. Nice Guy.
No, not really known for being tolerant of people disagreeing with it.
Especially family.
Yeah, especially family. So maybe she just kept quiet, you know, protect herself, protect her kids.
Yeah, it is a dangerous game. I mean, those thrones, they get slippery.
Exactly. But some historians, they think maybe Elizabeth, well, maybe she had her own doubts about the whole thing.
You mean like she wasn't sure if they were real or not?
Yeah, like maybe a part of her was still hoping just a little bit that one of her brothers was actually still out there.
Can you imagine? Thinking your brothers are dead, and then suddenly these guys appear, claiming to be them. Who do you believe? I mean, that would just be heartbreaking.
Yeah, it would be. And we don't have anything from Elizabeth herself, no letters, no diaries, nothing. So we're just left guessing.
It's like she's holding a piece of the puzzle, but we don't know what it is.
And that's just another layer to this whole crazy story. So we've got Simnel, we've got Warbeck, the documents, the silence. I mean, it's a lot. And we still don't really know what happened to the princes. But I think that's kind of the point, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess so. This mystery of the princes in the tower. It's been around for, what, over 500 years?
Yeah.
And we're still trying to figure it out.
Exactly. There's no easy answer, no clear-cut solution. It's like a historical cold case that just keeps drawing us in.
It makes you wonder, why this story? Out of all the stories from history, why is this one so captivating? What is it about the princes that keeps us coming back?
I think it's a lot of things. I mean, the story itself, it's like something out of a play. Two little princes, stolen away, vanished. It taps into some of our deepest fears.
Betrayal, power, not knowing what happened to someone you love.
Yeah, all of that. And then there's the mystery. We've got all these clues, all these different pieces of evidence, but they don't quite fit. It's like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing.
And you just know there's something more, some hidden truth waiting to be uncovered.
Exactly. And maybe underneath it all, there's this longing for justice. Did Richard kill his nephews? Was he framed by the Tudors? We don't know for sure, but something bad happened, right?
Oh, yeah.
And these pretenders, even if they weren't the real princes, they represent this idea that maybe, just maybe, things can be set right. That even after all this time, the truth can come out.
It's like they're giving a voice to the voiceless.
Exactly. And that's a powerful idea. And that's what makes history so fascinating. It's not just names and dates in a textbook. It's a story that's still being written, a conversation that's still going on.
Yeah, it's about trying to understand the past and maybe even learn something about ourselves in the process.
Absolutely. So if this whole thing has got you thinking, if you're curious about the princes and the pretenders, well, there's a ton of stuff out there to explore. Read the accounts, look at the evidence, see what you think. Maybe you'll even come up with your own theory about what happened all those years ago.
You never know. Maybe you'll be the one to finally crack the case. But until then, keep that curiosity alive. Keep asking those questions. Because history, well, it's more than just the past. It's a mystery waiting to be solved. And who knows what secrets we might uncover along the way.